Hi, everyone. We can start off officially now. Pleasure to welcome you here today. My name is Steve Mason. I'm the Aga Khan Foundation's Regional Director for North America for Programs and Partnerships. It's a real pleasure to welcome you today to this event on better practices in gender lens investing. I would like to start today by paying respects to the Anishinaabe Algonquin Nation, on whose unceded ancestral lands we gather. I would also like to affirm our commitment to the reconciliation process. As many of you may be aware, the name Ottawa is derived from the Algonquin word for trade, recognizing that this location, where the three rivers meet, has long been a place where goods and ideas have been exchanged. It is our hope that our dialogue today, in its own modest way, will contribute to that exchange of ideas that has been going on for centuries. I am particularly pleased to be welcoming both an in-person and a very large virtual participation. I think we had over 100 people planning to join online to share knowledge, good practice, and ways forward on gender lens investing, a topic of critical importance to the Aga Khan Development Network and the world at large. As we will see and hear through today's presentations and showcases, taking gender-based factors into account when designing and deploying investment capital not only has a direct positive impact on businesses led by and benefiting women, but also has a much broader impact on the social, political, intellectual, cultural, and economic advancement of women and girls. We are at a critical moment in this field where we have the tools, knowledge, and expertise to mainstream gender lens investing, but still face a number of barriers to reaching this goal. Today, you will hear about successes and lessons emerging from a program aimed at supporting women climate entrepreneurs, as well as learn about new efforts to further broaden the knowledge base and uptake of gender lens investing. Most importantly, you will all have the opportunity to contribute and provide your insights and recommendations. We are thrilled to be hosting this event in partnership with Criterion Institute, WUSC Global, World University Service of Canada, and the Aspen Network of Development Entrepreneurs, with the generous support of Global Affairs Canada. Cet événement se déroulera en anglais, mais nous serons contents de prendre des questions en français. So, without further ado, I'm going to welcome my colleague, Liam Thorne, to the stage. Liam has been responsible on our end for our program to support women climate entrepreneurs, and he's going to give an overview of some of the lessons and results of that program.
Good afternoon, everyone. Over the next 20 minutes, we'll have a chance to share.
Matters, and there's no act too small and no problem too big.
We'll have a chance to share with you some of the learnings and experiences that have come out of the Accelerating Women Climate Entrepreneurs program. And to kick us off, I'd like to share a segment of a short video.
AWCE is an initiative that supports women businesses that are climate related. The program is supported by Global Affairs Canada and is implemented by a consortium led by Aga Khan Foundation Canada, World University Service of Canada, and Aspen Network for Development Entrepreneurs. We are glad that the program has had a lot of impact to the women climate entrepreneurs. First of all, by bringing awareness to issues regarding gender lens investing and climate financing, but also building the capacities of economic intermediaries, the partner intermediaries that we're working with. Those that we're doing directly, dealing with the women entrepreneurs.
The training that I was given by ANDE and Aga Khan Foundation on sponsorship has allowed me to understand the business model more concretely, understand our financial position and investment readiness, and also be able to develop the scale-up project for this demonstration project that we're currently implementing.
Through AWCE program, we are able now to restructure our business because we are able to learn about business management skills, which are market discovery, investor discovery, but also a good business model and a good strategic plan.
So sisi ni biashara ambayo ina deal na kusindika vyakula, especially fruits. Tuna source our fruits kutoka kwa wakulima wadogo wanawake, na pia tunatumia wanawake katika kuprocess kwenda kwenye paste, candies and later on powder.
Kasole Secrets ni kampuni ambayo tunaleta suluhisho za kibunifu katika masuala mazima ya hedhi salama. Tuna hizi taulo za hedhi zinaitwa Glory, kwa wale ambao mnaweza kuziona kwenye maduka, mnazifahamu na wengine pengine mmeshazitumia. Taulo hizi ni taulo ambazo zinatumia mkaa wa mwanzi, tunasema bamboo chako, kwa ajili ya kusaidia hasa wanawake na wasichana wale ambao wanapata changamoto kubwa sana za hedhi.
Kampuni yetu ni Rosho. Ni Rosho kwa ajili bidhaa yetu ni siagi ya Rosho.
Go on YouTube and finish watching the remainder of that video that continues to give a really good insight into some of the key aspects of the project, including accounts from women climate entrepreneurs themselves. This video has already touched upon two overarching objectives of what was a 2-year initiative, very much implemented as a pilot project. Firstly, to strengthen economic intermediaries, providing gender and market responsive support to women entrepreneurs focused on climate-related businesses. And secondly, to increase the startup and scale-up capital invested towards women entrepreneurs focused on climate-related goods and services. The project focused on the missing middle between subsistence micro-enterprises and those large enough to access commercial financing. It did so by adopting an ecosystem strengthening approach, and therefore supported, in some cases, the very nurturing of entrepreneurship values, while also undertaking considerable consultations led by WUSC with women entrepreneurs, policymakers, intermediaries, and investors across sub-Saharan Africa. This formed a solid foundation from which to adapt capacity strengthening and support to women climate entrepreneurs through intermediaries in a way that worked towards addressing the barriers and opportunities for 270 women climate entrepreneurs to grow their businesses in sub-Saharan Africa, and has made significant progress on increasing the business growth and satisfaction that women climate entrepreneurs have towards the quality of support they received from economic intermediaries integrating climate and gender lens investing. The project provided direct capacity strengthening in climate and gender lens investing, business development, and gender equality to 5 entrepreneurship support organizations, 3 of which secured funds through ANDE's Catalyst Fund, and has engaged 370 intermediaries, which includes incubators, accelerators, climate finance stakeholders, and broader entrepreneurship actors. Before going into some of the broader learnings to come out of the project, I want to play for you another short video that will once again give you a more direct insight into what the project was able to do, focusing on Westerwelle Startup House Kigali, one of the Andes Catalyst Fund recipients.
This is the Chic Night Screenpreneur program, which is part of the Aspen Network of Development Entrepreneurs, ANDE, Accelerating Women Climate Entrepreneurs, AWCE project, with this financial support from the Global Affairs Canada, GAC.
We've been working with schools in Rwanda through their environmental clubs.
Our prototype is based on hydroponics, where we're using to producing the seedlings.
We decided to employ the people whom we saw that were not employed mostly around the country.
As XGuard, we are providing a platform that will combine agricultural data, including weather.
We are developing a fully automated farm where our main focus is to increase the productivity in agriculture.
My piece of advice to the women is that they have to first believe in themselves.
You have to keep pushing and be ambitious about your goal.
This is our planet, we should live it and we should love it in a way of contributing to something that is beneficial to the society and community in general.
Welcome back. To build on that short video and share some further learnings from the project and its integration of gender lens investing, it brings me great joy to hand over to Judith Lee, Director of Programs at Westerwelle Foundation, who as we speak is currently in Berlin and has very graciously accepted to join us late at night. Good evening, Judith. The floor is yours.
Good evening, can you hear me?
Yes, we hear you clearly.
Super. Hi, everybody. Hi, everyone online. Hi, everybody also in person. It's really my great pleasure to join. That's also why Blaise and Sarah, who you saw inside the video, were not able to join. I got the honor of speaking at the late night spot. So yeah, my name is Judith. I'm actually a Canadian living right now here in Berlin, and I'm at our headquarters, and I want to tell you a bit about our She Ignites Greenpreneur program, which we ran last year all throughout 2022, and hopefully share some interesting insights. So I've prepared a little slide. I don't know if it's possible to put that on the screen as well. Super, that's it. So if we go to the next slide, I can tell you a bit more about the Westerwelle Foundation. So as I said, we're based in Berlin, and our mission is to uplift emerging markets through empowered entrepreneurship. And what this means is that we set up co-working spaces which act as entrepreneurship hubs throughout Africa. So currently we have one in Tunis, one in Arusha, one in Kigali, Rwanda, and we're looking to expand at a pace of one per year. So now looking into West and Southern Africa. And so as you can see, the majority of our operations are in Africa itself. And last year alone, through our entrepreneurship support programs, we're able to train and support and incubate over 729 founders in last year alone. So the program I wanted to speak about today is actually one that we ran out of the Westerwelle Startup House Kigali. So if we go to the next slide, I can show you a bit more about the curriculum. It was actually a full year of support. We started off with running a call for proposals and sensitization campaign in order to gather interest around the idea of climate entrepreneurship run by female founders. And so we had a 2-day hackathon for 100 women founders, including the team building component, going through some education regarding climate change. And then we also went forward to actually build the pitches with the support of coaches. And so we did actually do the team building during the hackathon in person. So after a series of pitching, out of 32 solutions and teams, we chose 15 teams of women entrepreneurs to support through 11 months of access to our co-working space in Kigali, as well as capacity building within climate, as well as soft skills like leadership, and also tech and business support, both in the form of cohort-wide expert sessions, as well as one-on-one mentorship. And then one of the most important aspects that we were able to bring to the table was access to networks and financing. And this was done through regular community events and field visits to green organizations and successful startups, as well as information sessions connecting the ladies with investors and the general ecosystem. And so we learned throughout that actually 11 months sounds like a long time to be supporting 15 teams, but actually it was almost not enough in the end, simply because when there's no existing ecosystem and there's no existing systems to support certain entrepreneurs, it actually takes a lot longer than, let's say, acceleration programs in Berlin or in Canada. So that was one of our major learnings from the curriculum and the time required. So if we go to the next slide, I wanted to start presenting also some results that came out of this project, which we concluded officially in December of 2022. So as of month 9 out of 11 months of incubation, you can see here that quite a few of our startups were able to complete their prototypes using the makerspace and technical support and coaches that we offered. And then by the time we finished the entire program, we actually got 10 out of 15 prototypes finished. And that for us was actually a pretty big feat, given that a lot of our prototypes which I'll show in 1 second, were hardware prototypes, which takes significantly more time to develop than software prototypes. Another learning we had was that actually it was team is one of the most important things, and because we did the team building during the hackathon and most of the teams were made out of people who were complete strangers before, it was very, very hard to motivate them to continue going. So a piece of advice for other intermediaries out there, we would really suggest for existing teams, and even if they have a very early stage idea, to be the ones selected, because they will be able to push it through until success in the end. And so also on the topic of successful prototype completion, we learned that there was a big gap within our ecosystem for technical expertise, and there was a huge need for a product person to drive these technical products forward, whether in the software or the hardware part. And so these talents were always in high demand, and it was always a trouble retaining this technical talent within the innovation ecosystem. And so I think whether through training of the tech talents or through just providing more expertise to the entrepreneurs in this field of tech, that would have been also very well received. So next slide. So here are some examples that you also saw in the video regarding what actually came out of some of the prototypes. So it was quite interesting because we realized quite soon that the entrepreneurs were actually taking from their daily lives and their processes and what they saw, and they were trying to improve upon that. So I think it was really ingenious that they were able to innovate. For example, we had handbags made out of upcycled material, and also in offering skills and employment to people who otherwise would not have had it to whatever reason. Also, we had a lot of agricultural innovations due to the big economic opportunity that exists in agriculture locally. And then also we had, for example, briquettes made out of organic waste, and this was as a solution to charcoal as the main cooking fuel. So I think it was quite interesting to see how within the context of Africa and a lot of other emerging markets, it's a lot more about climate adaptation and resilience rather than about mitigation. Of course, we also want climate mitigating ideas and innovations, but given that Africa only generates 4% of the world's CO2 emissions, I think it was so much more about creating resilience and innovation for their daily lives. So going forward, beyond the innovation component, we also saw quite a few positive impacts. So to the next slide, please. So in terms of the general final impact that we had actually 2 startups that began commercializing their product, and this includes business registration as well as paying customers. And then as we heard also closer to the beginning of this year, we had 2 other startups who began commercializing their product as well. In terms of access to finance, a total of $44,800 was accessed in grant funding, where we directly helped the ladies to make connections or support them in their applications, and that's how they were able to access this funding within the ecosystem. It was actually pretty interesting that out of some of our community events, we started together with the Global Green Growth Institute, the Rwanda Greenpreneur Network, and so this was created in order to improve the capacities of green businesses in Rwanda. And actually our program manager Blaise, as well as an alumni that attended this program, they both were part of the founding members of this network. And then another very amazing thing was, I think, out of the learnings, we were able to start actually a new climate incubator in our hub in Tanzania, Westerwelle Startup House Arusha. And there we were able to really propagate also some of the great impact that such a program can do. So I think we can take it off, take the screen share off for maybe some general learnings regarding the investment landscape, which is why we're here, and also regarding the general, let's say, entrepreneurship ecosystem within Kigali. So first off, we realized that ecosystem is actually the only approach to building success for entrepreneurs in general. So we realized that it's very important to provide a stable support system. As currently still in most ecosystems, there's really a patchwork of support. And what that means is entrepreneurs will see that certain intermediaries or investors will call for proposals or call for or provide grants during certain windows of periods of time. However, the entrepreneurs have need for access to finance all of the time. So that's still unfortunately not in existence, that not a lot of governmental initiatives or international development initiatives are supporting the entrepreneurs according to the entrepreneurs' needs and timing. It's really coming in short bursts. And so, of course, we as intermediaries, we try to find all and aggregate all of the grant funding opportunities that are out there, but unfortunately it's still always a struggle for these entrepreneurs to support themselves in the early stages. And so beyond making sure that there is a stable, ongoing timeline of support for the entrepreneurs, there also needs to be a variety of supporters within the ecosystem. And what this means is that governments need to support them, ESOs like us need to support them, but also corporates are key to supporting innovation in general. So corporates need to see that it's not really a competition, it's really more just to support innovation in general as an entire ecosystem and private sector. And so, unfortunately, we still see that, especially in emerging markets, the topic of women entrepreneurship and climate entrepreneurship, and especially the intersection of the two, it really sometimes falls between a lot of buckets of aid in public sector or of focus within the private sector. And so I think it's really important for programs such as AWCE, as well as others that we're participating in, to really shine a spotlight on this in particular. And so that moves me to my last kind of general learning, which is that access to finance is definitely the biggest challenge that we saw out of our entrepreneurs. So really we however, understand investors, they also require motivation, and for them, they need to be able to de-risk or see some other type of support in providing investment to these types of entrepreneurs. So all in all, we saw, for example, investors who wanted to provide 50% of the funding as matching funds to, for example, other types of, to other investors. And also, I think finally, what would be really great, which we saw, is to just get more money into the hands of these women themselves. So it would have been great to see more programs offering cash grants, especially for early stage entrepreneurs, especially in the stage of hardware and innovation, where it takes a lot of money for R&D, which just simply doesn't exist in the ecosystem. So as of now, we are actually looking actively for funding partners, experts, and also advisors to run version 2.0 of She Ignites. So we would be really, really excited to call to action and speak to anybody who would like to support our entrepreneurs in Rwanda, Tanzania, and Tunisia. I think that my time is up as of now, and I really hope that these learnings were able to underscore a bit some of the scenarios that are happening on the ground.
Thank you so much, Judith, for these reflections and some of these learnings and key takeaways that you've been able to take from the project. You know, we're really fortunate that we can make your participation work within this hybrid format, and having at least one of the 5 entrepreneurship support organizations present today, I think really elevates the conversation that we're able to have. With the remaining few minutes, and I realize that now I'm a bit over schedule, but I hope you'll allow me, I'd like to focus on just 3 key points as takeaways for today. Firstly, and as we've touched upon and Judith reinforced as well, the underpinning strength and the takeaway from AWCE is the importance of that ecosystem strengthening approach. To be able to effectively respond to the needs of women climate entrepreneurs with one of the key components to this approach being gender lens investing. We know from the project's consultations with women climate entrepreneurs that they face a range of barriers, including access to finance, the limited number of capacity building programs that integrate a gender lens and climate lens, the need for increasing the need for increasing the mentors of women entrepreneurs within these circles, the limited visibility, and added to the unsupported social norms at household, community, and institutional levels. Therefore, concerted collaboration by a variety of ecosystem actors is vital to addressing these barriers. Given the deep-rooted challenges facing women climate entrepreneurs that are based in these gendered norms, financing is one of the solutions. And while finance service providers must understand these gender norms and related barriers when they are developing sustainable solutions to ensure the products and services meet the standards and the needs of women climate entrepreneurs, a whole host of ecosystem actors have important roles to play as well, and effective coordination between them is vital. Secondly, undertaking an ecosystem strengthening approach is contingent on drawing on the strengths of partnerships to deliver outcomes. In this case, the project successfully drew on the particular strengths of ANDE, WUSC, and AKF, combining with the keen interest of GAC to achieve significant progress in a short period of time. However, in this 2-year, $2 million pilot initiative, the project witnessed an overwhelming demand for more climate, gender, and entrepreneurship programming that far exceeded the project's ability to match it. One of the reasons being that women entrepreneurs who work in the climate sector not only provide innovative solutions that increase communities' resilience to climate change and mitigate its further impact, while also creating viable and prosperous business opportunities, but they themselves are also facing the acute and increasing impacts of climate change. There's therefore an increasing and growing demand and need to integrate climate and gender lens investing to tackle these issues. And the final point I'd like to make that feeds well into the roadmap that you'll hear about shortly is that the sustainability of the achievements of a project like AWCE to move beyond its pilot form is contingent on our ability to leverage the momentum that is being generated globally on climate change, climate financing, and gender lens investing. As a practical example, if we take AWCE's achievement of integrating gender lens and climate investing into the core training curriculums for a number of intermediaries in sub-Saharan Africa, one of which is actually receiving subsequent funding from Village Capital and FMO to train another cohort of women climate entrepreneurs using this training manual, and that ANDE's investment manager training graduates are also benefiting from an updated training curriculum that now integrates climate and gender lens investing. We can expect AWCE to have a continued impact on future investment managers, women climate entrepreneurs, and entrepreneurs more broadly across sub-Saharan Africa. But equally, their continued usage by investment managers and intermediaries is also contingent on the prevailing market demands, the direction of donor funding, and the interests and approaches of global finance stakeholders. Therefore, we need to ensure that we are meaningfully engaging these actors within our projects to build on this current momentum and further scale the impacts that projects like AWCE have. With that, I'd like to hand over to Sam and Katie to present to you the Gender-Transformative Climate Finance Roadmap that paves some of the concrete ways forwards from here. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much, Liam. And thank you to the previous speaker for a kind of fascinating insights into kind of the inner workings of this project and program. So within this Accelerating Women Climate Entrepreneurship project, WUSC had the good fortune of leading the policy and the learning agenda within this project. And so we addressing and adapting to the climate emergency is a critical issue for WUSC and our stakeholders, as of course is the struggle to achieve gender equality. And WUSC has been engaged in the field of gender lens investing for a number of years, including we conducted a mapping study of gender lens investing in the Global South in 2019, working on this project, the Accelerating Women Climate Entrepreneur Project, as well as an upcoming project in Sri Lanka called Growth, Resilience, Investment and Training. It's a 7-year initiative contributing to building a gender-responsive entrepreneurial ecosystem in the north of Sri Lanka. We're also launching a GAC-funded project based on nature-based solutions in the Ghanaian forest of West Africa, giving women greater voice and leadership in planning and benefiting from climate adaptation. WUSC's approach, and I think was reflected and the learnings that came out of this project, is to contribute to influencing ecosystems as a whole to work towards gender equality and outcomes for women on a larger scale. And this includes influencing systems of finance within and outside the climate finance space. What's being presented today is a specific experience that came out of a desire from, and I'm talking about the roadmap that we're going to present, a desire from Global Affairs Canada and other development partners and global finance stakeholders, to better understand how to apply a gender lens to climate finance. And the roadmap was, while it was funded by Global Affairs Canada, it's intended to reach a broad range of donors and funders and stakeholders in the sector. And while it's focused on gender lens in climate finance, there's overlaps in the themes between gender lens investing more broadly and in the climate space more broadly. We had a great team of researchers to help with this, and what you heard earlier from the AKFC presentation was some of the piloting of approaches and interventions that we could make. With the learning and policy agenda, we were trying to extract some of the learnings to provide advice through this roadmap for key donors and other key stakeholders. Katie Turner, who's coming up next, and who's going to, and that's the interesting part of this discussion, is going to highlight some of the research and the lessons that were brought out of the global, for global finance stakeholders, including Global Affairs Canada. There's 3 findings that Katie's going to go into in a little bit more detail, but I'd just like to highlight before handing over. The first is the ongoing need to invest in entrepreneurial and finance ecosystems in the countries and regions in which we work. And you heard that from our previous speaker in the need to have consistent ongoing support across the ecosystem. And so supporting the whole ecosystem become more responsive to women entrepreneurs. At the moment, there remains, and I think we discovered this, too much focus on individual accelerators, individual incubators, some supply-side training over kind of the more systematic change that needs to happen. One of the sort of testimonials from one of ours was, we're overtrained and underfinanced, and this is an issue. And a second finding from the research is that we must continue to pursue blended finance initiatives that can work and unlock real capital for women climate entrepreneurs. Our research made clear that money is not flowing in the quantities and in ways that can support gender equality and climate resiliency. And the third and final thing, strong gender analysis is required to build financial instruments and structures that meet the needs and capacities of women. And this came out quite clear, and this is also the topic of our discussion in the session after here, which we're going to go into more detail. That's it for me. I just want to introduce Katie Turner. So Katie's going to talk a little bit more about the content of this roadmap. Katie has been working closely with WUSC on gender lens investing, financing entrepreneurial ecosystems that focus on women. And she's going to run us through a short presentation on the roadmap. And the roadmap is available on our website as well as You might provide a link, might you? No, you probably won't. You go to WUSC's website, you'll find it. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. I think ecosystem is the word of the day so far, which makes me super happy because we cannot work in silos anymore. And I am an ecosystem builder, and I love making connections, and I always just see connections, but more often I see people working in silos. I see organizations working in silos, and I see there's so much opportunity in this space, in gender-lens investing, in climate finance, to work collectively to have greater impact. So, so happy to hear ecosystem from Sam, from Judith, from Liam, from the women in the videos. And I was really also happy to be part of this project on the research team. So, and also really happy to be here today because so many of you I've met online and have either not seen in person in years or have never met in person. So it's awesome. So I do have a slide. Yeah, perfect. Thank you. So you can go to the next slide, please. So understanding the perspective of the women climate entrepreneurs and the environment in which they operate was absolutely critical in developing this roadmap, and critical for any organization that is working in this space. Understanding the perspectives of the people that you're trying to support. These quotes here were some common experiences that came up from the over 50 women climate entrepreneurs that we interviewed. I'm sure many of them are familiar to you, and of course many of them are common to women entrepreneurs in any sector, but we felt that the climate space has specific challenges for women entrepreneurs, given that it's a very nascent sector and given that it's male-dominated. And I just want to say that in one of the videos that we just heard, I actually met a few of those women climate entrepreneurs, and they're just fantastic. One of them said we need to be ambitious, we need to be confident, we need to be go-getters. All of that is true, but there are systemic barriers that are preventing those women from succeeding, even if they're super confident, even if they're ambitious. So I think that is the piece where the ecosystem comes into play, and the different actors, all of those different actors need to change the way they're working in order to support women climate entrepreneurs. Next slide, please. So this is the roadmap that we developed. This is the visual. So tons of information here. I'm not going to go into all of it right now, but basically what it does is it outlines some barriers, key barriers that we uncovered, and provides some solutions. And the symbols sort of indicate the roles of the different ecosystem actors and the roles that they can play in supporting the ecosystem. But on the next slide, what I wanted to highlight is the title of this roadmap. Next slide, please. Towards a gender-transformative climate finance ecosystem for women climate entrepreneurs in sub-Saharan Africa. So for me, key is gender-transformative. This isn't just a gender-responsive or climate finance roadmap. It's gender-transformative. We're trying to shift systems. We're trying to remove the barriers that are facing these women climate entrepreneurs at a very deep level. And then again, ecosystem. This is not going to happen just by providing capital to women climate entrepreneurs. It takes a whole ecosystem approach by all sorts of different actors who need to understand the barriers. So those were two key phrases and key words that we wanted to include there to highlight the importance of really hopefully contributing to some systemic change. Next slide, please. So I'm going to go through three of the key barriers that we came across. You've heard this before: lack of understanding of WCEs. So you know, we've said it before. We all know this. We need to have a deeper understanding of the challenges and the obstacles that are confronting women climate entrepreneurs. We need to have the skills to do a very comprehensive gender analysis to really understand what are the gender norms that are at play here? What are some of the different factors in the enabling environment that are influencing or preventing women from growing their businesses? So without this gender analysis, none of that's going to happen. And so it's so critical that that there's individuals and organizations who are skilled at carrying out those kinds of gender analysis. And the ARISE project is a fantastic example of an initiative that's directly targeting those barriers, the fact that we need more standards, higher standards in gender analysis. We need the people who can do that, not the investors. We need gender specialists coming to the table. We need to value their skill sets. So I think that was one of the first barriers that we uncovered, and it's, as you'll see, it underscores the other two that I'll mention. But this idea of really understanding the context is so critical. So the next one that I wanted to mention is a no-brainer: access to finance. Everyone has mentioned it. Everyone knows access to finance is an issue. But specifically with women climate entrepreneurs, and again, because this is a new space, relatively new space in climate, a lot of the financial service providers we spoke with just don't know enough about climate to be able to develop climate products, including climate products for women. So again, going back to understanding the needs of the women that they're trying to serve. I also want to note that first-time women fund managers also experience challenges in accessing capital as a result of systemic barriers. So it's not just the women climate entrepreneurs. And so it's really critical that we address this, given that we know that women fund managers are more likely to invest in women-led or owned SMEs. And we actually found through our research that some women fund managers, because they have lived experience with climate change, experience the impacts of climate change, they're more likely to invest in climate-related businesses. So I think there's lots for us to consider there, and lots for opportunity for donors to be able to target initiatives that are supporting those areas. And then the last barrier that I'm going to outline today goes back to I think, Liam, you highlighted this in your comments. Most of the ecosystem actors just don't have the understanding of how to invest in women climate entrepreneurs. Before the roadmap, another report that we developed was recommendations on how incubators and accelerator programs can support women climate entrepreneurs. So we found lots and lots of areas and ways, including mentorship, including access to finance, that very specific roles that incubators and accelerators have to play in this area. There's lots of other ecosystem actors that can play a role here. One interesting one that we came across was universities. STEM programs at universities and colleges, they have a really strong opportunity to better support women climate entrepreneurs. We all know that women are significantly underrepresented in these STEM programs. It's not because they're not qualified. It's because the programs aren't reaching out to women. It's because the programs aren't designed to meet the needs of women. It's because potentially there's not daycare facilities to meet the needs of the students at the programs. So we need to start viewing these types of opportunities to better build the pipeline of women who are coming out of these programs, not just as entrepreneurs, but as potential STEM advisors or STEM policymakers, and really increase the number of women who are in the space. Next slide, please. So this is my last slide. This is what we want to see. This is what we want to see as a result of the recommendations in the roadmap. We want to see better opportunities for women climate entrepreneurs, not just with finance, but supported by collectively supported by an ecosystem. So thank you very much for your time today, and I think that if there are questions, we're going to hold them until after perhaps Joy's presentation. Speaking of which, I get to introduce Joy. Yes. So I met Joy, and thank you very much, by the way. I met Joy, I think maybe, 10 years ago when I was working at META. And I was very intimidated by this person named Joy Anderson, and probably still a little bit intimidated, but not as much. Anyway, Joy is so amazing, founder of Criterion Institute and global leader in gender lens investing. I've worked with Joy on a number of different occasions, and one of the phrases that always comes to mind when I think of Joy is fix the capital, not the company. I just love it so much. It's so concise, it's so clear, and it's so important. So thank you very much, Joy, for all your contributions to gender lens investing.
I'm going to wing it a little bit here. Oh, wow, Mike, wonderful. I'm just going to do a small change. I'm going to start with where I think the field of gender lens investing is for just about 5 minutes, because I think the ARISE project is specifically responding to that, and then I'll have my people come up right afterwards. So I want to define gender lens investing very quickly. So Criterion's definition, that's widely accepted, is to integrate a gender analysis into the structures, the analysis, the decision-making of how capital moves. So how do we bring a gender analysis into how finance works? And you end up with sort of 3 general buckets of activity. One is access to finance for women entrepreneurs. And so one of the reasons I wanted to start with a quick overview is women entrepreneurs are amazing, so important. The basic reality is many entrepreneurs in the world are women. They are the bedrock of many economies to build things. But it's not the only way we think about gender lens investing. So one is women entrepreneurs, and I think what was so clearly named in this presentation, and we will definitely build on it in terms of ARISE, is it's not just about moving capital to women entrepreneurs, it's moving capital that is appropriate, right? So what you heard all the way through this was a gender analysis of how money goes out and making sure that as a result of a gender analysis, processes, structures, analysis changes, right? It's just, that was gender lens investing in action. Look, this is what the women say they need. Let's do that instead. As opposed to fixing them and saying, you know what, would be really great if you actually didn't need that. We'd like you to need something else. Because then we could provide it for you and feel super good and call ourselves gender lens investors. Second piece is to think about shifting how risk and return are calculated within finance. This isn't just pointing money in a different direction, it's fundamentally changing the underlying analysis of what's happening in the economy, right? One of the things we were so struck by, and a bunch of us came together to look at as the recovery from COVID was first being imagined, about 5 weeks into COVID, we came together and said, how will gender matter to the recovery? There were a remarkably few number of people asking that question, despite the catastrophic impact on women's economic empowerment that COVID and the downturn of the economy had, right? But people who were looking at recovery weren't saying, how do we get women back to work? They were sort of saying, oh good, now they're home, they can stay there. That's great. Anyway, a little facetious there. But there wasn't enough of a gender analysis in how we look at risk. The third thing is we can use finance to come together and address systemic issues. We can. We can use it to address climate, because climate is a gendered issue. We can address the care economy. We can address gender-based violence. We can address reproductive health. Now, it is not the most important tool. Civil society, the government, philanthropy is much more important in those areas. I will acknowledge that, but finance has a role. So I wanted to just start to expand our definition, because while I absolutely love this project, it's just so cool, I also want to make sure that we're not thinking about gender lens investing only as entrepreneurs. Just a little bigger lens. With that, can I have my co-conspirators come up, Sam and Megan and Senna? So coming up to the table are 3 people. Do we have 4? 3. It's just 3 of us. Am I missing anybody? It's been a long day. So coming up here is, and we'll let them introduce themselves as they go through, but Criterion and ANDE and 2X Global make up ARISE. We came together formally about 18 months ago to really start. So while this is called the launch of, we've been at it for about 18 months, so it just feels like a launch because we're here and it's fun. And then I've actually asked Sam, who manages our relationship within GAC, to start, because a core part of what we're doing within ARISE is also thinking about the role of governments in gender lens investing. So maybe starting with you, Sam.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, hello. Well, thank you so much for introducing me, Joy. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you. You know, it's really, there we go. It's an honor to be here with all the organizations. ARISE is really important to Global Affairs Canada for many reasons. One of which is its strong alignment to our International Assistance Feminist Foreign Policy, FIAP. The Feminist International Assistance Policy sees gender lens investing as a key opportunity to disrupt gender power relations and promote women's economic empowerment. So we feel very privileged to be a part of managing this relationship and working with these organizations. ANDE, 2X Global and Criterion Institute are implementing this project, and ARISE is really working to build sustainable partnerships between women's rights organizations and the private sector so that they can speak the same language. And specifically, we are really excited about the process standards that will be coming from this project. So I'll leave it there and I'll pass it back to you because you are the experts on this. I'm really looking forward to hearing more about it.
If you want to go sit out there, because that's your whole little stump speech, if you want, you can go watch if you want, or you can stay here and we'll keep talking to you and putting you on the spot if you want. You're going to released. Thank you, Sam. It's really been a remarkable partnership with Global Affairs Canada to really think through how do we do this kind of work, because ARISE is a field building, and it's funding the going to field building. That doesn't happen, right? It's hard to nail down what actually is going to happen. We all know that systemic change is really important, but it's really hard to put accountable capital towards it. And so it is a sort of just been an incredible process of figuring out how to do that, figuring out what the right logic models are. We all know how difficult this is. And even if you're doing gender lens investing, field building, it's still difficult to figure these things out. So at the core, what ARISE is doing is two things. One is we're building a set of process standards in the field of gender lens investing. So, what's that? In general, when we think about gender lens investing and we think about the standards, we think about the outcomes. How many women did you invest in? How much money went to companies that are addressing issues connected to women and girls? That's where we start. Very important. Right? To what level are we getting to gender transformative change in context? All of those are really important. Here's the challenge in gender lens investing. We've been trying to name that we're getting to those outcomes without actually changing how we're doing finance. And gender theory, feminist theory, whatever you want to call it, says if we are not addressing the power dynamics, we will not get to the change we want. Full stop. So we've been saying in gender lens investing that we're going to point the capital in a new direction, but not change the how. So we're not going to compete with other standards. 2X still will have their criteria. All of the standards, the OECD DAC standards, will still be out there. We're coming in underneath it to say, what are the best processes? How do we know that power dynamics are being addressed in the analysis, right? we look out at climate entrepreneurs, and people are not saying adaptation driven from local communities. Am I right, Carrie? That's not what they're saying, right? They're saying big companies moving lots of capital. So one, how do we do a gender analysis of the market in which we're investing? So that's the first place. How do we have standards about what good research looks like? The second is, how do we show how to address power dynamics in the structures of the investment? Did we align appropriate in terms with what is needed in the market? Can we actually, many entrepreneurs actually don't want to grow. Many businesses don't want to grow. How do we come up with trade finance and other forms of financing that appropriately meet the needs of agricultural finance and address power dynamics in the context? The third thing is, how do we actually address how financial service companies, fund managers actually run their own businesses? Are they prioritizing building the expertise to look at gender? They don't have to have it in-house. You know what they could do? They could partner with an NGO, like say a lovely Canadian civil society organization who might work alongside them because they have knowledge of the context, right? So the third thing is, how are we shifting the ways that in the systems of finance, people are looking at their business? And do they actually address gender-based violence within their own workplace? All of these sort of straightforward things. So Sana, maybe after you, where are you seeing this in terms of standards overall? How does this fit within the 2X world, standards and gender lens investing?
Absolutely. Hopefully everything's working on the mic. Okay. First of all, Joy, I just wanted to thank you for going back to that first principle around what gender lens investing is about, and this grounding of what it means to do deep gender analysis that thinks about power and privilege and bias, because some of what we're talking about is that shift in mindset that's needed for more systemic change. And that does sit at the core of our work at 2X Global, which is the recently merged entity of Gender Smart and 2X Collaborative. As it relates to standard setting, it's actually one of our 3 strategic pillars, which is about aligning standards. So the 2X criteria, and if you're not familiar, happy to share more, was co-created by the DFI community, 7 of the DFIs coming together in 2018 to come up with a set of standards around how to harmonize of what gender lens investing could look like. There's well-adopted criteria that now provide the baseline and a bit of a floor for the entry point of what it means to invest with a gender lens, but as Joy rightly named, so much of that is focused on the performance and the outcomes and how do we know that the money has moved. But where we get really excited about the integration with AWCE is that focus on the how. So in addition to thinking about how much money is moving, how well is it moving? What is actually shifting in terms of process, in terms of strategy, etc. Right? So that's one big piece of it, and we can certainly speak to more. On the 2X side of things, another development maybe to share is that we are co-creating with the broader gender finance community a certification framework, which right now has 2 audience categories, one on companies, one on funds, and then that will extend to financial institutions and other institutional investors and instruments over time. And it's built on the 2X criteria as a foundation, but it's meant to contribute to this wave of more verifiable third-party sort of verification, more transparency and accountability. It's not good enough to say that, oh, we meet 1 2X criteria and therefore we're good, but what does it mean to actually do it well? And the integration with AWCE in this is that, again, the process metrics, and I don't know whether we'll get a chance to share more of the specifics of it because they're really quite rich. It really helps to be integrated into our metrics where, it's really about getting different, the audience categories, as I mentioned, particularly also one of my colleagues, Liba, here is working on an investor working group that's really trying to get asset owners to adopt the process standards, make this commitment to do better and what that could look like. So I'll pause there. sure we'll come back to it.
Yeah, absolutely. And a great tee-off, just to really reinforce the assumption behind ARISE is a couple things. And we spent the day at Global Affairs Canada and repeated this a few different times. But one is, we're working with the members of 2X Global, with philanthropists and institutional investors who are already doing remarkable things, because there's a fundamental assumption that we need to lift up, and the Libe's investor working group that many on our team are working on as well, is really looking at who are the investors who are willing to ask for more. Because at some level, we're not going to keep creating the business case for rich, complex gender analysis. Not suggesting there isn't one, I could make it, but at some point, the people who have the capital and who are putting out the technical assistance dollars need to ask for it. And if we keep asking for it, then it will be built and it will seem more normal and people will know how to do it, and then we can make the case for how to scale it. But at some point, we need to draw attention to what those practices are. And so the second underlying piece, which will come to sort of a significant part for ANDE in this, so we have two pieces. One, we're setting a set of process standards asked for by governments, particularly donor agencies, and private investors, asset owners more broadly. The second is the field of gender lens investing, and I was there from the beginning, has been built without enough gender expertise. This is understandable, right? You could talk about, it's not really for me about how many women are in finance, because as we all know, being a woman doesn't mean you can do a gender analysis. Men can do gender analyses as well, right? We just saw some great men doing a gender analysis up on this stage, right? It is not solely the prerogative of women. And so we focused a lot on diversity. Let's get women at the table. And I am not suggesting that representation is not important, but we haven't really gotten a clear connection to the folks on the ground who have the contextual knowledge, right? Which is what's so great about this last example, right? You're on the ground. You're actually in the communities talking with the intermediaries who know what's happening in that community. We don't do that enough, and we don't do that enough with a gender analysis. And so the second part of the ARISE program is to build the translation function. And so to do that, we have both been thinking about who are the translators out there, and we don't mean individuals, because it's very privileged. I have an enormous privilege to be able to flip between gender and finance. It's because of where I sit in the world. So rather than thinking about individuals who are translators, the more just way to think about it is organizations that can serve a translation function. And we can talk more about this. Pranay, who leads this, is sitting in the front, and I'll actually go back. Since we haven't actually done all this, Kirith and Susie in the back run our process standards work, and sitting next to Susie is Elise, who runs, you kind of run everything, don't you? That's my assumption. Who works there sort of across managing the program within 2X Global. Sitting next to Susie is an amazing gender expert that sits inside of Criterion, Melanie O'Leary. Who did I miss? Pranay, I think we got it. Oh, Liba, right. And I called you out before because of your amazing piece. Oh, and I'm sorry, Samira and Sam are Mel people. So Samira and Sam. Where'd you? Sorry, Melanie. Why am I doing this? In the back, Melanie. Leading our, so if you have questions about how to evaluate all this kind of stuff, they are the rock stars figuring this out. So we've been building, what does this translation function look like? We have found 150 or so organizations that play this translation function, right? And they may not be the women's rights organization on the ground, but they're the one that can make the connection to it, right? So they're the they're the WUSCs of the world. Actually, our first translation study was written in partnership with WUSC. So the first thing is really understanding, identifying who's doing this translation function. The second thing is we gave a set of grants to Canadian NGOs, civil society, who we believed could play a leadership role in building the translation function within civil society in Canada. And so out on the table is a summary of all of these grants. We didn't do a competitive process. We had a pretty clear sense of who was already doing this in Canada. So we gave a grant to WUSC to actually continue to look at their translation function in Ghana and Sri Lanka, and to think a little bit, to do some organizing for us. The first event is this Thursday, to really think with other civil society organizations about how do we build this into programming, really, right? It's not just the gender expert that sits off to the side. You know, those gender experts that sit off to the side that you consult from time to time, and you bring them in to genderize something. That's not what we're talking about here, right? So what does it really look like to build a function? The second is we gave a grant to Corliss, formerly SheEO, to really pay attention to the private investors. And these are small grants, by the way, right? Sort of re-grants. We're talking about under $100,000 Canadian. So with Corliss, we gave Vicki Saunders and her team a grant to really work with private investors in Canada who are willing to use their own power and build a toolkit for them to address their own power. So, because again, translation doesn't only sit out in the world, it could actually sit with the private investor who's running a small family foundation in Canada. Third, we gave a grant to the GATE program, the Institute for Gender and the Economy at the Rotman School of Management, otherwise known to me as Sarah Kaplan, who's one of the great minds in gender lens investing and has been there from the beginning. And so Sarah actually has a conference. If you don't know about it, it's coming up next week on gender analysis and business. We thought it would be appropriate. We both supported that conference a little bit, but even more importantly, they're doing a series of case studies about people who have played this translation function. Finally, we gave a grant to the Equal Futures Network as part of CanWatch. And I'm so grateful that we were able to give this grant to a group of women's rights organizations who are opening up their conference to have a conversation about finance. And that's just the beginning, right? So we'll be doing a series of things with them. And that leads to ANDE has both been working in all kinds of wonderful ways to support our thinking about translation, thinking about how ANDE chapters play this translation function, and we're about to launch a new round of grants, because if anybody hasn't heard that working with the Catalyst Fund at ANDE is the way to get money out in the world, I just want to say tonight was an advertisement for the Catalyst Fund. So also, like the previous group, which is partly why we're all here together.
Yeah.
So go ahead, Megan.
Yeah, I'm happy. So I'm Megan Smith. I'm with the Aspen Network of Development Entrepreneurs. We were actually involved in the AWCE project, as you saw, as well as being involved in ARISE. We will be working closely with Criterion on taking the translation piece and localizing, working with Pranay closely. And we have 8 chapters, regional chapters around the world, predominantly in the Global South. And we'll be working with some of them, I think, to really get this out there and localize it, apply it, and then adjust it to what's really happening in these spaces with those with entrepreneurs and with entrepreneurial support organizations in those contexts, and then investors and impact investors and funders as well. Additionally, we're going to be doing 2 rounds of grants, and this will be an open RFP process, competitive process, where to continue this research and build on the best practices and the standards that we'll be developing. These will be small grants, $40,000 to $50,000. We're planning to do 2 rounds. This summer we'll do a round of 5 or 6, and then another round in the fall to continue the research. And those will be open and very, it's an open, like, what research needs to be done? What can we explore? And then maybe make the argument for additional research. We're really hoping to attract applicants from the Global South, from these contexts, not just kind of driven from the north and you know, where a lot of the capital is coming from. So we're really hoping that this really sparks the finance imagination, as you said.
So I can imagine, I forgot the name of the organization that was founded previously, but imagine if a bunch of women climate entrepreneurs, I forget what the word is, like women who are working on those people that we were just talking about. What if they came together and named a really yummy research project that would let us get underneath women's participation in responses to climate? Right? What if they had a $50,000 grant to explore what a better investment thesis might be? Because too often, as we know, the research that is commissioned kind of looks like a Rolodex, telephone book if we're happy, of women entrepreneurs in whatever place we're talking about, right? So how do we shift away from just finding women to really doing the deeper gender analysis that can shape what we see as the investment theses? So with that, we're going to stop talking. Sana, you're going to stay up here. I think Pranay is going to come up and join, and Katie coming back up, and Steve, I'm back to you.
Okay.
So we get to be the Q&A time, so questions. Well, he's going to say that now.
Great. So we're moving into our final 10 minutes of this event, and I promised you audience participation, so you're getting it. So we had a very rich discussion, covered a lot of ground in terms of gender lens investing, deeper dive on some of the climate stuff, broader overview from Joy. So the floor is open, and I'm going to invite you to give your inputs, if you have it, your reflections on what you've heard, some ideas. I would also invite you to ask questions of any of our presenters. We have a group up here who hopefully will be able to answer most of your questions.
And we probably get some gender diversity.
Exactly. But if you have a question for somebody else in the audience, unfortunately, I think Judith has Judith left us, or she's probably gone to bed, which is, I will not blame her for. But any of our other presenters, please do feel free to ask. So the floor, the virtual floor and the in-person floor are open for questions or comments or reflections. And don't be shy. Or you're going to force me to kick you off. Yes, Sue, of course. And please introduce yourself. Yeah. We'll just wait for the mic and introduce yourself, Sue Sabo.
Well, thank you, Steve Mason. Sue Sabo, let's see, now I am Special Advisor Innovative Finance at Global Affairs Canada, and had the pleasure of being there when the AWCE program was started, as well as some of the ARISE work. So one of the things we've heard, about the investment community is that, this whole area of trying to move not just into gender, but into emerging markets is often difficult. All the risk factors that they don't know how to take into account. And one of the things we've been advised is maybe don't try to go out there and do sort of a blanket approach, but find the champions and try to get things snowballing so that they can also then influence their peers. And I wonder, from where you're sitting, does that kind of an idea have resonance, and what might it look like then in the kind of context of what we're all trying to work on? Thanks.
Give a food group of a champion. What kind of people might be a champion?
So we've been talking, for example, to institutional investors,
Okay.
and they're a bit the holy grail of trying to bring in institutional investors, get that huge amount of capital going to where we think it needs to go for the SDGs. And yet, at least in some of the Canadian contexts that we've looked at, there's not a huge movement of institutional investors for lots and lots of reasons, saying this is where we want to try to put our capital.
Okay.
I was going to jump in because I think the first thing that comes to mind is just and Joy, we can argue about this.
Please do. We don't have one good argument. We're going to failing at our job.
Right? So thinking about the mobilizing impact of bringing together the development finance institutions around a common goal of mobilizing capital towards gender equality. And I hear from Jessica, who's our CEO, who is one of the people at the table coming up with the criteria alongside others, about how hard it was even to come up with the first set of criteria, but then what it took to institutionalize those into action plans. But having a peer group that was aligned around that goal was one thing. Having a target, and this is where I said we can argue, because is the target enough to show that you're doing enough on moving the dial towards gender equality? The first wave, the first commitment was $3 billion, that was exceeded at $11.4 billion that was committed, and the next challenge, which wrapped up at the back end of last year, on track to meet its $15 billion target, right? And now as 2X Global, we're thinking about the next iteration of the 2X Challenge that will be open to 2X Global members. There will be a volume target, but in addition, we're starting to think about how can we really bake in more impact metrics and additionality so that we are showing how it's going further, right? So that to me is an example of galvanizing the community, providing that peer action space. There's a little bit of peer pressure too, right. Because it's like I'm doing this and oh no, and then there's deal sharing, etc. Right. So I think that's one very live example.
Yeah, I really want to reinforce that second piece. I think the challenge with an individual champion is people in finance don't ever want to be alone, right? They got into a business that literally is about hiring lawyers to be in relationship with others. Like I only did that once. Like I was good. But like the whole idea is they want to do it together. So the piece that I just want to echo in what Sana said is rather than thinking about an individual champion, where do you see pockets of excellence growing? And then how do you encourage them to foster a race to the top? Because part of what's happening right now is the lowest common denominator is being rewarded. If you consult with women's groups at the beginning of your process, then you get applause. That's just not even that you changed your decisions as a result of that, just that you talked to them, right? So a couple places where then we've seen clusters. So I will say the DFIs and the development banks in Europe are right now a little bit of a cluster in a race to the top, particularly with the new European Union. So with the new European Commission's policy around gender, but they're all looking to each other and say, but we're doing this, but we're doing this. And so the European Commission has been sitting in the middle of that saying, we shouldn't be rewarding the lowest. So the mistake we often make is look for what are they all doing, and then we can ask for that. But how do we pull out some best practices? Who's doing it great? And then how do we foster this race to the top? I will say we're seeing the same thing within the DFIs who have come together within the gender-based violence working group as part of 2X Global. Again, here's a set of DFIs who are saying not good enough yet. Sure, we've got all the safeguards in place, but what else can we do? And so within that community, talking to each other, our investor working group is another place for a race to the top. And I will say a lot of what DFAT has actually been fostering in Southeast Asia was a set of Pranay and I worked for about a year with a set of fund managers who were all looking at things in new ways. So not a single organization, but a cluster, because then you get to volume faster. With that, go ahead.
No, I would just add.
We could just keep going with your question.
Yeah. We'll just have one question.
No, another cluster that we're seeing is private investors who are realizing that the 2X standards, the 2X criteria are great, but I think part of it is maybe some funds have individuals on their teams who have more experience with women's economic empowerment or gender equality, and they're seeing that they want to go farther. They want to go farther, and so they're starting to think, okay, well, the 2X criteria is a good base, but on our own, we're starting to think about what are other indicators that are more meaningful to measure women's economic empowerment, and even Equality Fund just came out with a framework that takes the 2X criteria as a base, but then takes it one step or several steps further. I think I haven't looked into it in detail, but there's just examples of people. This is kind of like the race to the top. So I think it's great. We're seeing that people are within the 2X community. I'm sure. I don't know if you've mapped it, but I'm sure there's different sort of layers. Yeah. And I definitely am seeing those investors who are wanting to take it many steps further, which is awesome.
Great, thank you. I think we have a question from an online participant, so would you go ahead?
Yes, so we actually have 3 questions that have coming online, and I will just start by...
Race for the top of whether or not this group can do better than the online group.
Okay, so I'll start off with the first question. It says, could AKFC and the presenters say how they have individually or collectively defined a gender lens, i.e., what are its inbuilt assumptions and knowledge bases? How is the concept of a gender lens evaluated as the project is rolled out and completed? I'm going to paraphrase the last portion. I think it says, what is the learning from the concept?
So that was directed to AKFC, but I'm going to do a very quick pivot to our experts on the side. Who wants to tackle that question?
Katie, do you want to start with that, or? Pranay's going to go.
It's a big question.
Pranay's going to, the man on the panel is going to actually go grounded.
I'm going to ground this in what we know about good development, which is gender transformative development reaches better development outcomes. And it's sort of the gender lens is extending that logic, and that gender analysis is just good additional analysis, which is the foundation of good investment. So gender lens investment is essentially adding that really strong understanding of power dynamics and norms in a societal context, that a very specific localized context as well. So there's multiple ways in which power dynamics shows up, and that's very intersectional. That's what we know with our gender transformative programming. That same logic holds in finance on both risk and return. So it is also an opportunity. And this is where the race to the top is really exciting, because framing it as the lowest common denominator means we stop at just doing gender analysis. Framing it as an opportunity and actually systemic risk is where we can actually bring in the race to the top.
Yep.
Next question?
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
and others, please put up your hand if you have questions, but go ahead, would you first?
Yes, so the next question says, what do the presenters think about the gender justice angle of the ecosystem? A systemic barrier in many countries are laws and regulations that prevent women from meaningfully participating in business, getting a higher education, etc., and ultimately accessing capital. How do you bridge the gap with social justice, advocacy, legal reform initiatives?
Great question.
All right. That is a beautiful question, and it is where I think we should actually be focusing. I'm saying this directly to you because you are the person talking. The Japanese pension fund and an Australian pension fund called HESTA have both come out really strongly to say that the way they look at gender, the way they do a gender analysis in their investments, is to see gender inequality as a systemic risk. So if investors, and in this case, massive, the largest pension fund in the world, massive institutional investors are naming gender inequality as a systemic risk, 2 things can happen. One is the people who are doing that research, who are actually understanding, we were talking earlier today, one of my favorite organizations is the Equality Institute out of Australia, who can study changes in gender norms. If investors are starting to ask the question of how do shifting gender norms, how do we look at gender norms and look at systemic risk tied to inequality, all of a sudden we're going to get funding from investors over time, not going to happen overnight, but over time for the kind of research that people are already doing. The second thing is it influences political will, right? If, and this is what HESTA did first very strongly, they went to the Australian government and said, we see gender inequality as a systemic risk. We're a pension fund and you should be worried about our long-standing stability as an economy. Right? You can imagine that a whole bunch of different places, right? That actually happened in Samoa, where folks were looking at gender-based violence as one of the political risks in the country and framing it as such. So in some ways, if you have that political will, again, the advocacy efforts have a new, I'm not going to say ally because that's too far, but they've got somebody else saying what they're saying matters.
And I just wanted to add that I think that this is where the promise of ARISE is really exciting, because it's about informing what the local context is, what are the research questions that you're asking, which then inform everything from pre-design to exit of whatever the investment might look like. But also, without that social justice lens, you're not thinking, let's say, about the role of the care economy and work that various actors at this table are doing in terms of what it means to have full labor force participation. Otherwise, we're just perpetuating systemic inequities, right? So this is the opportunity.
I hate to end a conversation when there's still questions to go, but we are at time. So I'm going, and for all those who are here in person, we do have some in-person networking, so you can catch up individually with anyone after. But I'm going to ask Joy to say a couple of closing words, and then Uju's going to close us out.
Great. This is a really important moment in the work that a lot of us have been moving forward for decades. Gender lens investing is dwarfed by climate finance. Let's face it, sort of like, think of the lute while you listen to the bagpipes. Not that it shouldn't be focused on the bagpipes, but we're at a moment right now where there is political will behind gender lens investing. There's political will. Sue and I have had so many conversations. Can we, for the love of God, really connect gender and climate in meaningful ways? But within gender lens investing, there are brilliant people doing remarkable things. You saw it at the beginning of people talking about what just the entrepreneurs on the ground are figuring out. And we have investment managers who are coming up with new approaches because they're listening. And they're looking, and it's just making sense. And so often we think gender lens investing is really hard, and we're going to ask for things that nobody wants. What I want to say is, from where we live, and it's not the entire planet, we know that, but there are people doing great things. And we need to hold them up and give them more power, because they could do even greater things if they had a bigger voice. And that's where I think, that's a core role that I think that RISE can play. That's a role where I think all of us, donor agencies and others, civil society, can say, let's hold up and give more power to the people who are figuring this out. So let's go do that. Well, I rarely am. So, yeah, thank you so much for coming. And Ujo.
Thank you so much to all of our speakers, all of our presenters, our facilitators who have made today's discussion what it is. Before we formally wrap up, I would just first like to thank everyone who has joined us both in person and online. We truly value your participation with us this evening here in Ottawa. On the screen, you should be able to see a QR code that has popped up, and we'd just like to get your feedback about today's session, how it went. So please feel free to bring out your phones and scan the QR code to be able to give us any feedback that you have. Also, just to note, outside of where we're meeting currently, there's a lot of material about the various projects and things that we've discussed today. So please feel free to grab any material that you feel might be relevant or useful to yourself, your organizations, or people within your network. And then we'll also do so to share the materials to our guests who have joined us online as well. And last, I'd like to also let everyone know that Aga Khan Foundation Canada is hosting another event on the 1st of May. So we are going to be having an event focused on global health, specifically speaking on response, recovery, and resilience in complex environments. So we'll be talking about the 4 Cs, climate change, conflict, COVID-19, and as it impacts women and children. So please feel free to be on the lookout through our socials, newsletters, as we share that information with everyone. And once again, thank you so much for participating today.